All right, so welcome to the first episode of the YWAM Talk podcast and webinar. You can find us online at www.ywamtalk.org, and you can email us at feedback@ywamtalk.org. This is the first episode, and this time we have the privilege of having Terry Sherman joining us to talk about support raising. Terry Sherman actually joined YWAM in 1982 and has been working since 2002, developing training and personal support raising for missionaries. Her dream is to see much more of this training available in YWAM around the world. So this Google Hangout on air and podcast will be a chance for us to hear from Terry about some of the key teachings that she's developed, and for us to ask her some questions about support raising once she's finished sharing. So Terry, thank you very much for joining us and for being our guinea pig on this first episode.
It's my great pleasure. I love being a guinea pig. It's wonderful to have this opportunity on this kind of technology to reach numbers of folks. Thanks all of you who have joined us live, and for those of you who will just listen later on. I hope, really my prayer has been that this would be a fruitful 45 minutes to an hour. So I guess are we going to go from this point on 45 minutes of input? Okay.
Yep.
So starting, okay, good to know.
So and for those of you who haven't joined us live, we will be hosting these events live now and in the future. And during the live session, we will actually be having a live chat window as well. So this will give people an opportunity to ask questions and to find out, maybe to see what Terry or our different speakers hasn't shared about, but is really, a question that's burning your mind. What's the craziest thing you've ever heard a YWAM do to raise support? That might be a question that you have. But whatever it is, you can ask that in our live chat during this time. And if you are listening to this either through YouTube or through the downloaded podcast, you can still send us questions through the ywamtalk.com website. And, Terry will hopefully be there as well afterwards to participate in the conversation. And depending how this goes, we may be able to have a follow-up opportunity with Terry. I did ask her that beforehand, so I'm not just throwing this at her now. But we'll see how this goes. And again, thanks, Terry, for joining us. And thank you also for all of those who are in the live chat who are joining us right now.
Okay.
I will hand it over to you, Terry, and I will grab all the questions that people have, and then we can look at those after you've shared.
Cool. All right. Well, I thought, for 45 minutes, I had to think, okay, what's most important? I have developed a 16-hour workshop, so it's like, whoosh, let's boil it all down and get some of the most key things that people actually seem to struggle with in raising support. And because this is something that I find everywhere, I go around the world, and I've been to quite a few cultures, been to Arab cultures, African cultures, Asians, you name it, North Americans, Europeans, everybody struggles with the same things. And being as this is our way of living and our way of being able to do ministry, it's so important that we, really grab a hold of some of those things that seem to become obstacles and block us. So I thought I would start with looking at some of those mentalities and ways of thinking that really become our obstacles. And after that, I want to just mention some practical steps on how to go further. I've also, near the end, I will show you some links to some other resources. I have a whole bunch of resources on Dropbox. I have an online course that I'm working on and hoping that will be, my goal is to finish that by the end of this year. And then people anywhere in the world could learn how to raise support through this online course. I'll give you the link to where that is started and will be. And Yeah. So basically all of my teaching comes out of my own experience. And I've been 30 years in YWAM, 30 years married. So we came into YWAM, actually my husband came in as a single man, and we knew each other, but we weren't romantically involved. And after he did his DTS, he came back to our church in Seattle to raise support, to join YWAM for 2 years. So he was raising support for himself, a single young man. And during that time, it was a mutual spark on both sides, and we fell in love, and he went back to Holland, and and I was actually on my way to Africa with another organization. And so this was a big interruption in my life, to fall in love with Ed Sherman. But to make a long story short, we got married. I joined YWAM, had to do my DTS then, shortly after we got married. And so when we started as a young married couple, we were living off of support for one person, because we didn't really have time to raise any more support for two people. When we went home and got married, we had 2 months to go home, get married. Basically, if nowadays people in YWAM would not recommend that they do what we did, which is as soon as you get married, turn around and join, go do your DTS. Ed had already done his. I did mine 5 weeks after we were married. Yeah, it was like dive in the deep end. Moved to Holland, all boom, right after we got married. And new culture, living in community, the YWAM culture, all that stuff was unknown to me. It was all new, and living on support, and what does that mean? And anyway, so out of our first 20 years of, of course, ups and downs. It had as many ups as it had downs, but I think we had probably more crises and struggle than we needed to, if we had been trained and if we had learned some very basic things, even just the biblical foundation as to what makes living on people giving you money, other people giving you money, a legitimate way to live biblically. These were questions that I had in our first 20 years, really. And so one of the mentalities that I think is important, and that many people, becomes an obstacle for people, is a short-term mentality versus a long-term mentality. And when we came in, we thought, we'll just be here 2 years, we'll do our missionary thing, and then back to normal life. So 2 years turned into 4 years. 4 years turned into, after the 4 years, we made a 5-year commitment. 9 years. After 5 years, we become indefinite. It's like you enter a whole new category. You're an indefinite commitment. The rest of your life, probably, although we never would have said that. Because again, you just keep thinking, how long are we going to do this, Lord? So we entered missions really with a short-term mentality, and not looking for the long haul, and not planning for the long haul. Just kind of living week by week, month by month, really. What's going to come in this month? We had a number of people who were definitely committed monthly givers from our church. This is also the one thing that was really a plus for us, and something that I stress to people is get a good home church. Make sure that you find such a thing, especially if you have any sense that you're going to be going into missions long term. You need a good, supportive home church behind you, and I don't necessarily mean financially. Our church actually didn't financially support us from the church budget really until 2 years ago. So, but it was a policy that they had. They didn't support any missionaries. But what our pastor did was he recommended and actually promoted us and other missionaries in our church to the body and said, get behind these guys and start supporting them monthly. And I'm so glad he did that, because people, many individuals then supported us, some for more, some for less. But it has really kept us going for 30 years, because it wasn't about the church. It wasn't about the people who went to that church, and we were all in the same church, so that's why we do this. But it was all about our relationships with those people. Some of those people left the church with a split, actually. There were several church splits along the way, disagreements about things, and we don't even know everything because we weren't there. But because of our relationships, with the solid, deep relationships we have with people, they continued to support us. Even when they moved to another church, even when they moved to another state. It was about our relationship, not about the church that they went to. So, but anyway, back to short-term versus long-term mentality. If you have, I'm really important to look down the road for the long term and make a plan and make a strategy for long term. It will serve you. It will just serve you in every way. I mean, Jesus says, who's gonna, if you're gonna build a house, what do? You have to count the cost. So it's part of counting the cost for living this lifestyle. Okay, that was number one. Number two, mentality that we all struggle with. Every culture I've ever encountered is feeling like a beggar. That somehow this, that we are dependent on other people giving us money, and maybe or we have to be asking them all the time, and then we feel like a beggar, which is not a pleasant feeling. And many, many, many people feel like this. And even though mentally they know they're not, and I knew this too, I knew mentally, I know I'm not a beggar, I know this is okay, I still emotionally felt like one from time to time, and there was kind of this weight about it. What another mentality that goes along with this thing, if you're feeling like a beggar, is that whole thing of asking is a lack of faith. Some people really have, I don't know, maybe it's their theology or who knows what. And I actually, I had these thoughts too in the early years. Well, yeah, to actually ask people, that's not showing trust in God. You're not trusting God if you do that. And I had to learn the biblical foundation about asking even. And is it okay to ask? And is that a cop-out or what? And beginning to learn that actually asking is a good thing. That this is what the Bible teaches us, in not just about money, but in every aspect. It's showing dependence. It's being humble. It's being willing to admit that you have a need. And these are all things that we actually struggle with, and particularly in the West, our Western mentalities struggle with letting people know that we have a need, or we want their help. But this is a huge thing, feeling like a beggar. What I love, I don't know how many of you have ever read Henry Nouwen's The Spirituality of Fundraising, but I want to recommend it. By the way, anything that I'm going to recommend for you to read, I have on a reading list, which is in... Oh, that's right, I'm not sharing this screen right now, am I? Anyway, and in the resources that I have, the file, I have a reading list with that you can get anyway, and I'll give you that link later. But Henry Nouwen's The Spirituality of Fundraising is, it's just a wonderful thing to read because his perspective is so biblical. And this whole idea of, no, it's not just us receiving. We have something to offer. We are offering people an opportunity to get connected into a beautiful thing that God wants to accomplish. Something that's fruitful, something that will bring life. And God has called us, and He's equipped us and gifted us to do a certain thing, and He's given us a passion for it. We are going out for it, we're going for it, we're doing it, and we're inviting other people to join us in this wonderful vision of life that we want to see happen and that God wants to see happen. So we're not just, begging and, please give me your money because I'm broke or whatever. It's no, together we can do something wonderful. We can see something that God wants to happen come about. And so we are offering people the opportunity to give their resources into the kingdom of God. It just happens to be through us. So again, this not thinking of I'm just a receiver. No, we are givers also, and providing opportunity, even providing opportunity for people to be blessed, because to give is a blessing. So again, it's a mentality of not. I think my struggle also was I was so hung up and caught up in my own thoughts and feelings about how it made me feel to have to be dependent on others, or to tell them that we don't have enough, or ask them for help, that I totally forgot and didn't understand the other aspect that, hey, wait a minute, that God wants to bless these people. Paul says in Philippians, it's not that I'm out for a gift, but I'm looking to see how God wants to credit your account. He was thanking the Philippians for their generosity, and he was just praising them for their giving. And then again, but the point isn't that I just want your money. The point is God is going to bless you, and you're going to be, you're going to be enriched because of how you've given to me and enabling me to preach the gospel. And it's a mentality, again, of how God wants to bless them, and not just, oh, poor me, I have to always be asking, which was one of my ways of thinking in the early years. So in a workshop, we actually spend quite a bit of time looking at this thing, because it tends to be such an issue for everybody. So the third mentality is we think that just getting by is okay, instead of expecting to raise 100% of our budget. And I had that feeling. I mean, when I say I basically mean both Ed and I. It's like, well, if we can survive, then I guess it'll be okay. And we did sometimes just barely survive in the early years. In fact, we did worse than survive. I mean, we went into debt, and we went in a few times, and we just went down below. And our wonderful Heidelberg YWAM base was gracious to not, basically put us in debt on paper. That they had a policy, not just for us, but for everybody, that every month everybody started over at zero. Now, we don't operate that way anymore, but we did for the many years in the beginning. And but we knew we were in debt. We knew we weren't paying our part. We knew that we weren't giving in, because we were living there, we were eating from there, everything was provided for us. But we weren't able to give in. So you feel indebted when you know you're not contributing your part. And that's another whole story of how God, got us out of debt, and how we learned many things through all that. But what happens is we tend to have what we call a poverty mentality, which says that, missionaries are supposed to be poor, right? I mean, they're supposed to be people who are on the edge, and not have luxuries, and not have, fancy vacations. And I mean, after all, you're a missionary. And then the question then is, where does that mentality come from? But, many of us have it, and it comes from somewhere. And again, we could go into all that, but I'm not going to go into that now. Another thing that we think about in this poverty mentality is that, this whole idea of living by faith, which is a kind of a term that we use, that living by faith and never knowing if you're going to have enough, that keeps you in faith. That keeps you in a place of dependence and on your knees and trusting, because you never know for sure what's going to come in. And it has to be God. And in a sense, a lot of this is true, but to think that that is the standard at which God wants us to live, which is kind of always below and underneath and down low on the ground somewhere, is a mentality that the Bible doesn't teach. It's probably comes from some theologies that have developed, which are not necessarily biblical. So this is a mentality that can be an obstacle for us, that we think, just getting by is okay and is keeps you living by faith. Living by faith, to use that term, I try to encourage people, don't use that term to define how you get your salary. And that's what they do. A lot of people who live by other people supporting them say, well, I'm living by faith. Well, maybe you are, and maybe you're not. But it's not about whether people individually are giving you money so you have a salary, or whether you work in a job where you're getting a salary that is provided regularly for you every month. No matter how your salary comes, we should all be living by faith and not put ourselves in a separate little category that says, well, I'm different. I live by faith because I get gifts from people. Somewhere that has, again, that's a wrong definition of that term. So I'm trying to help people learn not to use that terminology to define how they get their salary every month. Okay, another mentality, the fourth one, that this work that we're doing isn't a real job. It isn't really work. And how many, or struggling with seeing it as a real job. And maybe other people are the ones who've made you doubt that, because sometimes people, parents or family members or who knows who, will say, yeah, but when are you going to get a real job? Why don't you just go and, when are you going to support yourself? When are you going to, really get some work? And they don't see what we do as work. And maybe we don't see what we do as work. But again, this is a biblical principle that we have to embrace. We have to understand. Jesus himself, when he was giving instructions to the 12 disciples, as well as when he sent out the 72, he gave them these instructions about going out to do evangelism. It was the first time it was the 12 disciples. They had just finished their DTS, and Jesus was sending them out on outreach. And he gives them all these instructions. And do this, don't do this, don't do this. Don't take a purse, don't, take extra tunic or sandals, and go find a worthy person who will take you in and support you so that you can be out sharing the gospel, because the bottom line is, because the worker is worthy of his wages. And so Jesus tells us right there that, first of all, people spreading the gospel are workers. So we are legitimate workers doing legitimate work. And not only that, but they're worthy to be supported to do it. And he says it again when he sends out the 72. And this is now the disciples have staffed that DTS, and now they're sending out the 72 on to outreach. And Paul repeats it again when he's teaching in Corinthians. that, and Paul actually vigorously defends the right of people spreading the gospel to be supported financially, materially, to do so. So a lot of this is biblical understanding that I didn't have in the first years. I hadn't done any Bible study about it. I hadn't read any books about it, raising support. There's wonderful books out there today. Scott Morton's book, Funding Your Ministry, Whether You're Gifted or Not, is an excellent book. I recommend it. It's on the reading list, which is in the file that I'll give you the link to. That's an excellent book. Miles Wilson has one called Funding the Family Business. Excellent. Again, he comes from Ireland. He's Irish, but so he's coming maybe from a little bit more of a European perspective, which is also really good because the Funding Your Ministry by Scott Morton is quite American. Uses a lot of American euphemisms. But still, the content of the biblical perspective is excellent. So, yeah, this is a real job, and this is really work that we're doing. And the fifth obstacle, mentality. Something that I encourage people to begin to see is that we need to embrace raising support as ministry. And that it's part of our ministry. It's not this thing that's all over on the side, and it's just has to happen all over here, out of view, and in our spare time, whatever spare time we might have left, it all happens there. But no, it's actually very central to our ministry and our ministries. We cannot do this without our ministry partners, without people who are investing in it and who aren't believing in what we're doing and saying, yeah, we love what you do, and we love what's the fruit that's happening, and we are happy to invest and to be part of it with you. So it's ministry to bring people into our ministry. We're not only bring them into your individual ministry, but they're coming into YWAM. I always think of the picture of our base, YWAM Heidelberg. We've got now about 105 staff, and each one of those staff people have a group of people behind them, around them, supporting them financially, emotionally, prayerfully, practically. I mean, there's many, many ways to partner because, it is all about partnership, and people are partnering with us to see the gospel go forth. So many ways to do it. But all those people are a part of Heidelberg. Heidelberg wouldn't exist if those people weren't with us. So, we tend to, sometimes that's all kind of pushed down and out of sight. But really, I feel like, no, we need to bring that way up out in front because they are just as vital. They are as vital as me doing the work itself. I can't do the work if they aren't there. And so I think more and more we need to be acknowledging and bringing that up and have it out in front. And see it as ministry, the time that we are taking to build relationship, to keep relationship, to communicate, to visit people, to whatever it is, whatever time and energy we put into raising support is part of our ministry. And this, this also really was helpful to me. It helped me turn a corner. And we're doing this at our base now. I first learned that when I did a seminar back in 2002. I think it was the first seminar I ever did on raising support. It was in Colorado, run by John Ray and Andy Huddleston in Stonewall, Colorado. And that was the first place where I began to realize, hey, it's true. Raising support is part of our ministry. We need to give it the time and the energy that it deserves. And now at our base, we give people 2 hours a week that they're allowed to use of work time for friend-raising or fundraising or support raising or whatever you want to call it. We tend to call it friend-raising after Betty Barnett's book, Friend-Raising, which is also a very good book that I highly recommend. Yeah, we've decided at our base we want to underline this truth that ministry, that raising support is part of our ministry by allowing people 2 hours a week to devote to it during their work hours, not only in their off time. Sometimes people, what some people do is they save that up, and we allow that, and they will use 1 day a month. That because what is it? Yeah, that's like 8 to 10 hours in a month. So they'll save it up and they'll take 1 day of to devote only to the whole support raising thing, whether that's working on their database or doing their administration or writing thank you letters or calling people to set up appointments or working on their presentation or who knows what. They can take that time, prime time, not just the leftover time. So that's something we're doing, and I'm encouraging other bases to find ways to really bring that into the base life, to show that we embrace and believe that raising support is part of our ministry, and we want to keep it out in front. Okay, so that's the mentalities I wanted to look at and some of the obstacles that we struggle with. And I wanted to move on to practical steps, but I wonder if there's any questions about this part before I move into the practical.
Yeah, we do have a few questions that have come through. Claire Simpson's asked one, Craig Cregan's asked a couple, and Dan Snell has also asked some.
Okay.
So let me just have a look. If we look at, some of them are practical, whereas others are more to do with the mentalities. So why don't we look at the mentality ones right now, since that ties in a bit with what you've been sharing so far. So let me just check them. All right, so Claire Simpson asks a good question. I'm glad you spoke of different attitudes, European versus U.S. As to me, European fundraising feels like a U.S. presidency campaign and can be viewed very cynically by people in my home country. How does one get past that attitude within communications about support?
Are you a European? Who asked that question?
That was by Claire Simpson.
Okay. And Claire is, where is she?
Let me just scroll down. She is European.
Okay. Okay. But living she's okay, in the EU fundraising, but using American methods. Is that right?
Yeah, that's how she's feeling.
Okay. And Claire, where is your home country? Just curious. You say people view it cynically in my home country. Can you write where? Oh, okay, from Norway. All right. Claire said that's from Norway. Okay. Yeah, well, I think that there is, probably an American way of doing things is quite kind of in your face, and very, I don't know. I'm an American, so I can say these things, can't I? But having lived I've lived in Europe for 30 years. So I understand the American way of doing things, but I also understand the European perspective and the European way. And I can also, I've been in Holland for all these 30 years. And the Dutch also, I think they have their own way of doing things. But I would just say, every culture needs to use the biblical principles in a way that fits their culture. But yet, I say that, but you need to not just slap the American in your face and here we are, running for president and vote for me and that kind of thing. But me, and my ministry, whatever. I'm not quite sure what you're saying by that, but I can kind of imagine. But adapt it to what is respected by Norwegians. But don't let your culture dictate also what how your ability to share. It's a fine line, actually. It's difficult because a lot of people say, oh, I can't do that in my culture. Because one of the things that I do teach when we get to the practical, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, and is that the best way to raise support is as personally as possible and one-on-one, individually, with people, inviting them to pray about partnering with you. That and I get people in my workshops to say, oh no, that doesn't work in my country. No way. People would shut down. I couldn't talk to them one-on-one about this. So then I ask, okay, well, why? Where's that coming from? What is going on here? But basically, in every culture, there is ways that people do value and respect interpersonal communication and one-on-one communication. And again, because it's the most effective way to raise support, because it's the way God has made us. God created us relationally. He is relational. He wants to relate to us. He has created us to relate to one another. And when we put everything only on paper or flash it on a big screen and keep it at a distance, it can, you lose that relational aspect. So because God has created all of us in every culture, Norwegians or Americans or Afghans or, people from Thailand, it doesn't matter where you're from, we are relational people. So learn, again, when we begin to learn the principles of relating personally, and we can even look at Paul and how Paul related, although sometimes Paul did things so boldly, even more boldly than I would today. He didn't always even ask. He sometimes just told the people that he expected them to support him when he came through and visited them. But he was all about relationship also. And when I come, I want to spend time with you. I've been so longing to see you. And after we've had some time together, then I am expecting you to send me on my way and provide for me to go to Spain and do my ministry in Spain. But in Europe, you need to find the way of communicating relationally that people can respond to. And again, it is more one-on-one. It says, to me as EU, fundraising feels like a U.S. presidency campaign. It can be viewed very significantly by people. Okay.
Dan Snell also adds to that just by saying that he thinks she's relating to the U.S. presidency campaign about the cynicism that we can face in Europe towards the attitude to support raising within the churches. And then she was saying that is what she meant. So
you mean the cynicism in the churches? Is that what you're talking about? That the church is cynical?
That's what it looks like.
That the European church is cynical about raising support. Is that right?
That's how I read it.
Okay. Meaning that they don't get it. they don't quite, understand about individuals raising support. I know that that's very common in throughout Europe and traditional churches especially, that they don't quite, they still haven't understood the whole concept of supporting individuals to do missions. They think more in terms of denominational ties. She says yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, this is a huge issue of the churches, how the churches respond to us wanting to raise support or be not, again, I would underline that we shouldn't be so even fixated on that our church will support us financially, that even if we can just get them to to come around us emotionally and to prayerfully and emotionally stand with us, that's already a huge thing. But if they at least will give you the freedom to approach individuals. I also know some churches where the pastor might say, don't go around asking people to support you in the church. And then you have to kind of listen to your pastor. But if that's not the case, then we should have the freedom to be going to individuals and do things in an individual way. I don't know if I answered what you were asking, but what do you think? Is that enough, or do you want to hear more?
Well, Claire did again say that, they don't get it at all.
The churches.
With the whole supporting individuals. So it could even be communicating more about what the ministry as a whole is doing. So in supporting an individual, they're supporting the ministry. Not sure if that's maybe a way around it. I haven't had an opportunity to share really in Europe about it. But obviously you've lived there for 30 years, so
yeah,
you've had a bit more experience than I have.
And we've seen a lot of change in Holland in this. That when we first came, I know it was a very strange thing for Dutch people to raise support to be in YWAM. It was like, what is this? What's YWAM? You're not with our denomination. And, no, this doesn't fit any kind of box that we've got. I mean, it's really out of the box. But slowly, over 30 years, I've seen a real change in the churches, even the traditional churches. I mean, the free churches have, that aren't, the evangelical free churches have really caught on to the idea of supporting individuals. I'm even trying to think why. Why have they? So much so that the Evangelical Mission Alliance here in Holland sponsors every year what they call a Homefront Committee Day, where they really Holland has really zeroed in on this little Homefront Committee thing of getting a group of people around you who will help you as a missionary. Not, the big team of people that you need supporting you financially, but just 3 or 4 people that are your friends and that believe in what you're doing, and you ask them, would you be willing to help me with managing my finances? Could you help me with my communications? Because I don't know if I'm really coming across right. Could you help me with whatever? And now, so the Evangelical Mission Alliance is giving input and training to these little teams of people around individual missionaries. So it's really caught on here in Holland. And again, even the traditional churches are beginning to open up much more and understand it and embrace things other than their own denominational missionaries. But it does take time. It takes time and it takes patience. And I would say I would just encourage you to just keep sharing vision. Keep sharing vision for the big picture, not just what you do and what you want to do, but share the big vision of YWAM. And this is what God has called, youth with a mission to, and the multiplication of young people going out with the gospel in so many different ways and influencing the spheres. But again, it takes time to change a mindset of the church. It takes time. Okay, any more questions along that line?
I'm just looking. The rest of the questions are mostly practical. As far as like planning for the future. Claire had another question about giving gifts and if sort of how you feel about using the funds that were given to then give gifts back to our supporters and then let's see. And yeah, how to maintain relationship, especially when you're in a different country. It's a big one.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And then
I know,
also
we've had an ocean
about,
between us.
and then also asking if you would intentionally raise sponsorship from your host nation. So I don't know if you want to look at those now or if you'd rather do those after sharing a bit more practical.
Okay, yeah, why don't I share some of those. I just have 6 steps I'm going to mention here, and then they might already address some of them, and then we'll see what's left that hasn't been addressed. I'm not going to go into a whole lots of detail. So the questions probably are a bit more detailed, which is okay.
Okay.
But just some practical steps. Okay, once we kind of get our own heart and our own mind and our own understanding in line with God's understanding, which is a big step and something I think that really is important for us whenever we are going to start out to raise support. The first thing I said is practice steps. Learn the biblical foundation and understand the spiritual dynamics of living by being supported by others. So really important is to get this this understanding yourself, because it will change how you look at it. Of course, we can't change how everybody else looks at it, but over time, as we are able to communicate, because we have the good perspective and biblical understanding, it will slowly begin to impact other people. But the spiritual, and understand the spiritual dynamics that, again, and this is something I teach in the workshop, is about the spirit of mammon, that we are, every single person on earth is deceived about money and the nature of money and God's intentions and purposes for money. And we have, God has some very specific ideas and thoughts about money. I'm going to recommend another book to you, Money, Possessions, and Eternity by Randy Alcorn. I haven't finished reading it yet, but this is a wonderful, wonderful book that is a real excellent Bible study about God's intention and purposes for money and possessions. We live in the kingdom, we're from now the kingdom of God, and we are to live with His standards and His principles, but we live in the world, the kingdom of this world, that is based on completely other principles and other values than God's. So in the midst of the world, we are trying to live God's way, and there's this incredible clash. And we see the clash in many ways. I mean, you even see it that churches don't understand about supporting people to do ministry. They haven't understood that biblical concept. But anyway, the whole spirit of mammon and understanding our deceptions about money and how we're impacted every day by that is really important. I give a teaching, we cover that during the workshop and talk about how are we influenced by the spirit of mammon. Again, another book that has taught me a lot about that. It's on this book I just showed you is not on the reading list. It's too new. I haven't put it on yet. But the book that's taught me the beginning of about the spirit of mammon is Wealth, Riches, and Money by Craig Hill and what's his name? Earl Pitts. Yeah. But it's on the list, which you can get. But we're greatly influenced by this, which really can tie us up and tie us down in the area of being free to invite people to give their money to us. We have wrong ideas about it to begin with, and we need to deal with those. So that's number one practical step, is to really learn the biblical and the spiritual dynamics related to money. Number two, know your calling and put your core passion into one sentence. We really have to know what God has called us to do, and not just to do, but to be. And what is His calling on my life? It has to do with your giftings. It has to do with your motivational gift and your personality. All those things together make up who you are and how God has created you to minister. And we need to know and understand that, and we need to grasp it ourselves, and putting it in one sentence is a very helpful exercise, because it helps you to define what God has put inside of you. So in the workshop, we spend time on that. I have 7 questions that kind of help you get to the real core of your passion and try to put it in one sentence. And that's in the resources also. So that is really, really important, because if you don't know your calling, how can you invite people to get in, become part of it and support you when you don't know it yourself? So number 3, once you know the vision and your calling and your passion, cast that vision as far and wide as possible. Cast it out there and just, share the vision and learn how to do it well. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be asking for money. Again, when we share vision, we're not always inviting people to give or partner. There's times that we will definitely be inviting partnership and asking people to consider giving or contributing in some kind of way. But there will be times that we will just share vision, because vision creates more vision. Casting vision is always fruitful, no matter what. So learn how to do that well. Again, in our workshop, we spend time learning how to do that. The 4th practical step, make a plan of action, which includes, of course, making a budget, so you know how much you need, and a communication plan. So learning, how am I going to communicate? How often am I going to do this? And how? Am I going to do a blog? Am I going to do something on email? Am I going to do any hard copy stuff? Am I going to do Twitter? Am I going to, anyway, there's so many ways to communicate nowadays that we really need to just create a plan so that we have a strategy and we aren't just kind of blasting people all the time like a shotgun. So make a plan. It includes asking who, what, when, where, how, and who else. And that's also in the resources. It's just the basic sitting down and making up a plan for raising support. Number 5, find an accountability or a prayer partner to help you reach your goal. Somebody, you shouldn't have to do this alone. And we don't have to, but often we think we do have to do it alone. But we can ask somebody to help hold us accountable for the plan that we come up with. And believe me, that is such a help. And they will encourage you. They should be asking you, how's it going? You should be submitting your plan to them and, having times of prayer together. So this is a very helpful thing. And the last thing I'll say is invite people to partner with you as personally and individually as possible. It's about relationship. It's about partnership. The money is, of course, important, but it's not the main thing. it's about what God wants to do and accomplish, and money will help that to come about. But it's the partnership with people that's really going to make the difference. And how much they give isn't so much the issue. It's that they're with you and that they believe in you and that they're behind you, and how to keep them with you for 30 years. Ed and I are still amazed at the core of people that have been with us for 30 years. But we had we had depth of relationship to begin with those people. Okay, so those are the practical steps I was just going to mention. And now, are there some detailed questions about the practical?
Yeah, I think we do have some good questions that go along with some of these practical ones that you've shared with us. So let's start with Cregan. And I guess this sort of ties into your number 4 with making a plan of action. And he was just asking, what are some of your favorite ways to maintain relationships while living in a country far away?
Okay, that's a very good question. And nowadays it's easier. When we started 30 years ago, all there was hard copy paper. That was it. And of course there was the phone, but it was so expensive that we never ever even thought about picking up the telephone. So now, one of my favorite ways, I make use of Facebook for trying to keep some, just a little bit of a hook with our partners. I play some, like Scrabble with some of them, and it's not a huge amount of people, but I'm very aware of trying to keep up with our partners and watching what's going on in their lives on Facebook, and just making little comments now and then, or liking this or liking that. That's, again, it's just this little hook that you've got that just kind of keeps you attached. It's nothing real deep, obviously, but it keeps a connection. Another thing, sometimes I Skype with some of our partners, not too often. Not too many of our people are really into Skype or Skyping. To them it's kind of weird and strange because they see everybody all the time around them. They don't feel the need to Skype. But there are a few that we Skype with now and then. There's a few that I actually call on the phone, and from here I have a really good, very cheap way to call America, because I'd say almost all of our supporters are still in America. We have some from within Holland, but very few. And we made a push at one point, and we had about 5 people here in Holland, and then it's just dwindled now down to only 2 from within Holland. And an occasional one who gives an occasional gift. But another thing I just started to get into was send out cards, and it's also something like Greets, I think, is another company that's similar. But a friend of ours actually who used to support us many years ago now has his own business with send out cards. So in a way we're kind of supporting him by coming under him and using cards, very personal cards, to send to people. I've used Plaxo cards because I am on Plaxo, but only just to store my database online, so that if it crashes, then I've got it stored somewhere else. And but you can send really, just email cards that show up in people's inbox. It's not a link that you have to go to a website somewhere. It's just a nice personal card that they stare at when they open up the email. It's in their face and very personal. And I use often my personal pictures. I use a lot with my own photos. I like doing photography, and so I like to use my pictures. It keeps it personal. What else? Over the ocean. Yeah, well, and that, we send our newsletter. What we do, we only do a hard copy usually when we go home to Seattle. We stopped sending out hard copies quite a long time ago, regularly. But when we show up in Seattle, often I make a letter actually even before we go, so that it's all printed and ready, and then I send it out. When I hit Seattle, I'll send out a printed letter announcing different places where we're having what we call an evening with the Shermans, little meetings in people's homes. And we bring Dutch coffee, and I make a Dutch goodie, like Dutch apple pie or boterkoek or something yummy. And then we share a PowerPoint or share our pictures and just have really personal connection with people when we're back home. But that's the only time that we send a hard copy now. And but I send my goal is every 6 weeks to send an email. I call them update, because I don't call it a newsletter, because usually newsletters, immediately you think, oh, that's 2 pages long and it will take time to read. So I never call it a newsletter, I call it an update. And it's just a short little thing that with a picture or two embedded in the email. Again, you see it in your face. When you open, they don't have to click on anything else. It's amazing how that click stops people. We're just so lazy, we can't even click, It's like, wow. So I try to help avoid the click any way I can. I know MailChimp is a great thing for that. I know you guys use MailChimp, and it looks great. A lot of people are into MailChimp, and I would like to actually get into it. I just haven't put the time and energy into it. This last year, actually the last 2 years in a row, I've made a calendar out of my own pictures, and sent it off through Shutterfly, which is in the States, but there's many places online where you can create calendars. And it wasn't a big wall calendar, it was a desk calendar. And it looked really, really nice. And I used my own pictures. And again, it was the people, I sent it to our core people who've been with us forever and ever, because of course I couldn't afford to send it to everybody, because it was about $7 each plus postage. But I sent it at Christmas time as a thank you gift and a Christmas gift. And I sent about 12 out last year, and this year I sent another 12 out to different people. So every year I'll kind of, take the next group of people that have been with us for so long and send it to them. But I haven't been a big gift sender in the past, but because of the whole photography thing that I enjoy, and I thought, I really want to thank these people. I want to know how important they are to us. There's a few ideas.
I think actually what you just shared there about giving gifts ties in with one of Claire's questions, because Claire actually does ask or does comment that quite a few friends give gifts to supporters from the country that they're ministering in. But Claire was just uncertain about like the use of funds to do stuff like that, and just wondering how that ties in with let's see, culturally I'm very careful with money and my supporters expect this of me, don't want to be seen as wasteful, or is this a poverty mentality of getting by and just barely surviving? So that's kind of her question with that.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question, because a lot of people have that question. Yeah, whether it's a poverty mentality really kind of depends on what you're thinking and why you're thinking it. It is important to be careful with our money. We need to be good stewards of what God gives us. I think what happens with some people is, and I think I thought this too in the past, it's like, oh, but it's their money, so I have to be super careful, because, what if they don't like the way I spend it, and if I go out for an ice cream, can I justify, or going to a movie or going to do something that's just fun and isn't ministry related? It's a big question, and I guess what helped me to understand that was Scott Morton's book. He talks about this. When people are giving to us, they actually are giving to God. It's just like with the Levites. God created that system of support for Levites to live off of. The people would bring their offerings, their tithes and offerings and sacrifices to the temple, but they were not offering them to the Levites, actually. They were offering them up unto the Lord as God had asked them to, and told them and showed them how they needed to. And so once they did that, it was no longer theirs. And God told the Levites, and you can make use of this for your own support, to live off of. You can eat from all of this. So it became the Levites. But the people give to God and are offering what they have unto God. So all your supporters they are giving what they have to God to use to further the gospel. They're bringing their tithes and their offerings and saying, Lord, here, take it and use it to spread your word. And if it's to me, then it's how I'm spreading the gospel is how it's going to happen. But once they've given it, it no longer belongs to them. It actually doesn't even belong to me. It actually all belongs to God. And so it's, again, looking at ownership. Who does it all belong to anyway? Okay, it belongs to God. He, in his mercy, releases some to me so that I can live and move and breathe and have my being and minister and enjoy life and all of that. So I'm responsible to God for how I manage what he has given me, whether it's through other individual people or whether it's through my boss who gives me a paycheck every month. Again, it's not about where it's coming from or who has given it. It's about how am I stewarding it. So there's no kind of, I think we sometimes feel very responsible towards our supporters because it's their money I'm using. But it's not their money anymore. And it actually even wasn't to begin with when you really stop to think about it. It's God's money. And we need to learn to not, to have the freedom to use it as he gives us the freedom and shows us how to use it. So we need to be responsible to God and careful. You're right about that. But not because what are they going to think about how I'm using their money. It's because what is God going to think about how I'm managing his money. So there's a mental, there's a ownership question here that will help, I think, your perspective on it. Does that help?
Okay. So we did also have a few questions actually come through specifically about what to put in your plan for the future, like looking at pensions and savings, retirement, that sort of thing. So Dan Snell asked that question, as well as Axios Kim, and just wondering what your thoughts are on planning for retirement and planning for the future, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, again, I think it has to do with counting the cost and looking at the long term. That I think the Bible teaches us that it's wisdom to store up for the future. Again, it's not, some people think it's a lack of faith if we have a savings account. But again, it's like, if you are looking at that savings account as being your salvation when you get older, or even your pension, if your dependence is upon that, then there is a lack of faith. But it's not because of the savings account. The savings account, just having a savings account doesn't mean that you don't have faith. It does depend on where are you placing your trust in your faith. Savings account or not, retirement fund or not. So a lot of it, again, it's a heart issue related to money and security. Where's our security? It's not in my pension fund. No, it's in God. Does that mean that we should never have a pension fund or never have a savings account? No. Again, there's a Bible study in Scott Morton's book, and I use it. I've gotten his permission to use it in my workshops and online. It'll be in the online course, just a Bible study. And it's in the file that I'll be showing you that you can go to. But I would say do that Bible study because it really gives you a much bigger perspective on these issues about money. Again, the wisdom of storing up for the future, there's wisdom in it. In fact, God even says that we should be able to pass on an inheritance to even to our grandchildren. Well, wow, how am I going to pass on an inheritance to them if I don't have anything myself, So God encourages us to be thinking of the next generations. And again, not just me. Don't let it just end with me. So biblically, I think it's very wise. It's a wise thing to do. How you will do it, I can't say a lot about that because again, every nation is a bit different how that works. You might need to start your own fund. Your nation might already have something like that. We actually just discovered that my husband Ed, he's turning 65 this year. He's eligible for Dutch pension, and we had no clue that could ever happen. We hadn't even, it was like, that's the last thing on earth that we ever even thought about. What? Ed getting pension from the Dutch government? We've never paid taxes into the Dutch government, so how can we get a pension? Anyway, we're going to discover all this later, but yeah, I would say also giving, of course, has to be in your budget. Giving has to be number one. We always need to be giving. If we stop giving, we'll stop receiving. It's just God's principle. Giving and receiving, they go together. And if you are holding on to what you have and not giving, it becomes a blockage point for God to be able to release more to you. We see that all through the scripture. So giving, very important. And whether it's giving to your, again, it's not but I'm using the money that these people gave me to give back to them. It's not their money anymore. It's God's money that He's wanting you to steward and use wisely. And so talk to God about all that and ask God what you should be doing. Is that good?
I think so. Now, I realize we're at the end of our time, but we do have a few more questions. Would you be willing to stick around for a bit longer to answer those?
I am willing, yes.
All right. So we do have two more from Cregan. I'll ask the first one. And it was, you spoke of your original sponsorship coming from your birth nation. Would you intentionally raise sponsorship from your host nation?
Yes. I think it's good to do, especially when you've built relationships. And we've got 30 years of relationships here, but it did take us a while to kind of realize, we can do that. We can raise support here in Holland. We've got a lot of people we've invested in and have good relationships with. There's no reason on earth why you shouldn't be inviting them to get involved in ministry and partner with you. In fact, the people that you've invested in are some of the best people to invite because they've already tasted the fruit of your ministry personally, or maybe they haven't. Maybe they've just seen it, But I'd say definitely do that with the relationships that you have, good relationships.
Now, just as an extension from that, would your answer change depending on if it was a developed nation or a developing nation, or would it be the same?
Again, it kind of depends on the type of relationships that you have. I don't know. Like, I'm just trying to think if I was in Indonesia, we have quite a connection with Indonesia, and we're sending people there. For a long time, we didn't raise support here because we didn't need to. Our support, we had, I don't know, we didn't think about the need. Actually, there did come a point where we needed more support, and we thought, oh, we need to go back to America and get it. And that's when God said, hey, you've got good relationships here. Why are you not asking them? It's like, oh, duh. But if I was in Indonesia, yeah, I don't know. I think I might find other ways to partner, to invite partnership, maybe not necessarily financially, but there's so many ways to invite partnership. And for people to partner with you is a blessing for them. So to think, oh, they can't afford to partner with me, again, it's not always about money. It might be practically. They'll be able to help you in practical ways. So in a developing nation, they actually are very often very generous, practically, more generous than we are in the West. So find ways to allow them to partner with you that fits their situation. That's what I would say.
Okay, good. Cregan does have another question for us. It's how do you respond to those who would tell me they could sponsor tens of missionaries to India for the amount that I'm asking? So this is sort of comparing the needed salary of nations like India with a much lower cost of living for missionaries and pastors versus the salary of a U.S. or a European missionary.
Well, again, it depends on where you're serving. If you were in India, you probably wouldn't need as much support. Even though, you're a Westerner living in India, but the cost of living will be less there. So, yeah, it all goes back to the cost of living where you're serving. And if people can't understand that, But, again, if it's up to where God is leading people to give and to support. If they would rather support 10 Indian missionaries or pastors, I would say, go do it, And God will make up for whatever you don't, I'm not so dependent on that person supporting me, so I would encourage them if they wanted to. But are you just trying to say that people are kind of like, hey, you need so much money, and look at these guys, they live on this? That's just a lack of understanding, I think, about the cost of living in different places.
I think he is saying that because he was specifically referring to the book Revolution and World Missions. And I remember reading that book as well, and that book was very much emphasizing that the church should be giving towards local missionaries rather than towards people who have to travel to the other side of the world for it. So I think that's kind of what Cregan was asking with that question.
Yeah. Well, again, there's room and a place for that, but I don't think it discounts that there needs to be other people doing other things that cost more money. I think both need to happen. But I think it's true. I think we should be doing a lot more to get people in the non-Western nations. Ed and I have a real commitment to what we call the fourth wave, which is this new, the next wave of missions from the non-Western world going out with the gospel. And we want to do everything possible to help equip them so that they can be as effective in their cross-cultural missions as possible. But they're not necessarily going to be pastors staying in their own country. They're going to actually be going out of their nation and spreading the gospel in another place. But so they need to raise the money to do the traveling and, maybe even go to a nation that is in a different economic level than they come from. So there's another thing to think about. But we're quite committed to that.
I think with how YWAM is going as well, I think you remember the stats is that, more than half of YWAM is now from non-Western nations or non-developed nations. So
more
even
than
YWAM
half
is kind of moving toward that. That's the last stat I remember, yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'm right. Not spreading rumors, but yeah.
Well, I know it just continues to grow from India, Brazil, Korea. China's going to explode, and wow. Cool.
So we do have one more question. Well, it's two questions, but it's kind of the same. Speaking about the accountability or prayer partner. So one was from Dan, the other one was Axios. So we'll do this question, and then I think we will call an end to this time. Dan's was, would you recommend that the accountability or prayer partner would be someone who is a sponsor, like a prayer or financial sponsor, or someone in YWAM? And then Axios sort of extended on that and also asked if you would recommend to have someone other than your spouse as an accountability partner, or is it enough to do it with your spouse?
Let's see, spouse. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I think it might be better to have somebody out, not, who's not your spouse. Because then the two of you could be, have that person who's encouraging both of you. Because we do have to do this together as spouses. And I think it might be better to have somebody separate who's being that accountability partner. And about whether they should be in YWAM or if they're in YWAM or what was the YWAM or what was the other one? It said
one was YWAM
question?
and the other was someone who is a supporter, so like a prayer supporter
okay.
or a financial supporter,
Yeah.
or possibly a pastor or someone.
Yeah, it just depends on the relationship. I don't think it matters whether it's a supporter or not. I mean, it could be because they are usually someone who's already gung-ho for you and believes in what you're doing. It should be someone who really, stands behind you and what you're doing and is believing in your vision and wants to see it succeed. So whether that's a supporter or a pastor or even someone else in YWAM, what it takes is somebody who is not a real mush heart person. It's better to have someone who's a little bit more, I don't know, how would you say that? What's the opposite of being a mush heart? Somebody who can really say, hey, listen, I really care about what you're doing and how you're doing it, and I think, I really want you to see you succeed. So, what's your goal for this week? How many people are you going to be inviting to, how many, phone calls are you going to make to set up an appointment? Or how many, have you finished writing up a list of people that you feel God has given you as potential partners? So somebody who's not just going to kind of pat you on the back and say, oh, isn't that nice? But, somebody who's going to push you a bit. So I'd say that's helpful and important, whoever that is.
All right, fantastic. So Terry, thank you very much for joining us. I haven't had any other questions come up in the chat room, so thank you for everyone who's listening live.
Should I share my screen at this point for that
we can
PowerPoint
do that.
with the what it has is the links to the Dropbox to the resources. And
well, we can do that, and then also on the whyimtalk.com site, we'll also put a link to all of those resources as well, so that way anyone who listens to this afterwards can see that. Because I know sometimes on a PowerPoint that's shared on the screen, it can be a bit hard to read everything, but we will definitely include that in the follow-up post, and then I'll put a link to that post also in the comments for this, so anyone who has participated in it can then follow that link and get all of the resources that you've referenced in your sharing. But if you do want to share that now, we can just show that to those who are here live if they don't want to wait a couple of days for me to get everything else live.
Okay, that's it. Right there. Do you see it?
Yep. I will type it out into the chat.
Well, yeah, the other thing I mentioned on here, under my email, I said, email me for a crash course. A number of years ago, someone wrote me from somewhere like Afghanistan or something and said, "Can you help me with how to raise support?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, how can I help this guy in Afghanistan?" So I created at that point, and I've kind of kept improving on it. It's what I call my crash course for raising support by email, and it has lots of attachments. But the body of the email then gives, a very good outline of step by step how you can go about raising a team of ministry partners. And so if anybody wants a crash course, they just need to email me and say, "Hey, could you send me the crash course?" And you can use it, you can send it on to other people too, which is cool. And this seminar is coming
Great.
at the ywamelearning.com, and that's where the SBS is hosted. So it's also where the SBS is online, and it's kind of nice. More things are coming on there, bit by bit. They like to have people create teaching to go on there.
Fantastic.
All right.
Hopefully I typed in that link properly for the Dropbox.
Yeah, it's quite a... No, it's not.
Oh,
No.
yeah, it looks like it worked. All right. Oh, wow, there is a lot of stuff in there.
There's a lot of stuff in there.
That is great. I'll
Good
make sure to include a link
stuff.
to that.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, one again is Word docs. It's obvious, and the other's PDFs.
Yep.
All right.
All right.
How do I stop sharing
Just click on the
this?
screen share button again, and that'll turn it
Oh,
on.
yeah. Okay.
All
Cool.
right.
So
So
you
thank
said something
you.
about wanting me to hang around or something?
Nope. This is
Oh,
it.
I thought you... Okay.
Yeah,
'Cause I
because
thought you said
we went
something
through and
about-
we answered all the questions, so we are
All right.
good. So, Terry, thank you so much for connecting with us and sharing not just some of the resources, but also your heart behind it and some of the things that God's taught you. And I know I've learned a bit, and I'm hoping that the rest of the participants have. And if you do have questions for Terry, you can email her at the email address that she has posted, which is etsherman@ymconnect.com. If you do have any recommendations or feedback for the more the technical aspect of doing this talk, you can email me at feedback@ymtalk.com. Or sorry, ymtalk.org. So yeah, feedback@ymtalk.org. We hope to do some more of these in the future. We will be hopefully bringing Terry back in the future, and also featuring some other speakers from around YWAM, just to share some of the things that are happening in the mission and elsewhere. So thank you so much, and God bless. Hopefully we'll see you again soon. So thanks again,
Yeah.
Terry.
Yeah, my pleasure. Really enjoyed it. All right.